recording because usually it takes a couple of seconds for the recording to start. So what I want to do is, first of all, welcome everyone, okay? And I want to introduce Millie. Millie is Mildred Herrera Arceo. She is in Playa del Carmen. She owns a company called Legally in Mexico, which you can find at legallyinmexico.com. She's been gracious enough to come meet with us this afternoon and talk to us about immigration, which we all know can be a process. And so if there is anything, you know, having lived in Mexico since 2004, if there's anything I can recommend to someone when you go to do your immigration documents, it is hire an immigration specialist. Millie would be an excellent referral. It is well worth the money that you spend with them to have them help you with this process. If you want to be a warrior and go in yourself, she's certainly going to give you some information to help you do that. But I can confidently assure you, having done it both ways, that I strongly recommend you have an immigration specialist work with you on your documents. They will help make the process much, much simpler. So with that, Millie, thank you so much for joining us. I want to turn it over to you. And let's get started. Again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, jump in and ask, or we're going to open it up to Q&A at the end. Okay, Millie, go ahead.
Hi, well, as Amber said, my name is Mildred Herrera Arceo, but it's too long, so everybody knows me as Millie Arceo because no one can pronounce Herrera. So if you want to find me on Facebook or in any page, I will show up like Millie Arceo. And I do immigration papers since 11 years ago, since I moved to Playa del Carmen. I am from Mérida, Yucatan, and I really love doing immigration papers. I know everybody say that I am crazy because I love it, but really it's something that it's like a passion for me because I have been doing this for so long. So I would like to talk about this, that I can answer all the questions. I hope that I can answer all the questions. So let's get started. So can I start now, Amber?
Oh, I had muted myself. Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, Millie.
Okay. So we are going to talk about the two kinds of residents that we have in Mexico. Before they were called FN3 and FN2. That's what a lot of people get like confused because I receive a lot of emails every day asking me, I want to do my FN3, can you help me? But well, to don't get confused, this is not the name anymore. The name for FN3, well, what it was FN3 before is called temporary residence. And for FN2, if you hear in any occasion this name, it is permanent residence. During this meeting, we are going to talk about the difference between these two, how can you get it, and all the questions that you have. So let's focus right now in temporary residence. Temporary residence, you can get this kind of temporary residence in different ways. The first that I think that a lot of people is doing is economic solvency. And we are going to talk about every of these kind of like every economic solvency and all that kind. We're going to talk one by one. So right now, as you can see, I am just going to read this part, and then we are going to go deeper on everyone. Economic solvency is one of the most famous, and a lot of people can apply for this one. Retire, I have a lot of clients that they come here retire, and it's easy to prove it too. Family bond, it depends if you have a family here in Mexico, and we're going to talk like what kind of family, to what kind of family you can apply. If you have a property, that's another way to apply. If you want to invest your money here. And the last one is to get a permission to work in a company. But okay, let's talk one by one. Here, I just post an example of the temporary residence. As you can see, I am here like looking with my mouse. In this case, this temporary residence, it says, in the first part, it says your name, your nationality, date of birth, your sex, and in this part, it says permiso para trabajar. That it means permission to work. Not all the temporary residents have this part. Just when we apply to a visa with permission to work is the only time when you will see this. So don't worry if you're temporary resident, don't show this part. And the most important part of the temporary residence is the date of expiration. Because in the permanent, we don't have a date of expiration, just in this one. Okay, let's start. The first one is temporary economic solvency. To apply to this kind of process, you need to prove 5,000 days of the Mexican wage in Mexico, which right now is 88.36 pesos. So I made already here the operation because I know that a lot of people get confused. So you need to multiply the 5,000 days for the Mexican wage, and this is the result. This is the, in pesos, this is the balance that you need to prove for the last 12 months before you apply to this kind of temporary residence. Of course, you will divide it between your currency. I didn't divide it because maybe you are from US or Canada or another country, so you can divide it from your local currency. But this is a balance. It doesn't mean that you need to get an income of this amount every month. No, it means that you need to have at least this money in your bank account, and you can move it, you can get out money, you can put more money, but at least we need to have this money to apply for the temporary residence with for economic solvency. The retire. A lot of people get really confused about the economic solvency with the retire visa. Why? Because a lot of the information on internet is very confused. A lot of people think that, well, I have 300 days, so I have this amount of money that is 26,000 pesos, and people think that with that money they can apply. No, that's not correct. This is just exactly for people that are retired and that they can prove this amount of money per month, but as a pension. So let's don't get confused with these kind of things. When you apply because you are a retired person, you just need to prove 6 months, the last 6 months of the bank statement where it proves that the money is coming every month. That is steady money, and at least you have 26,508 pesos divided in your currency too. Another thing that you need to prove in the retired residence is that you need to have a letter from the Social Security, just like showing that you are receiving the money from them. That is not another income. Like, for example, if you are renting in a house or something, no, it needs to be like from retired pension. Temporary residence with family bonds. These just apply for if you have family in Mexico, like that's something that gets confused to people too. Because, for example, if your mom is Mexican, but you have been living in US all your life, and now you are 20 years old and you want to move to Mexico because your mom is Mexican, here is a problem because the time to apply is under 18 years. So if you are older than 18 years old, you cannot apply through this. You will need to wait. But the other way that you can apply for the family bond is, for example, if you have a Mexican wife or husband. And in this case, that's the only case when you can apply here in Mexico. Because in the other ones that we have talked, you need to apply in a Mexican consulate outside from Mexico. You can apply in any consulate that you want, any Mexican consulate. It doesn't need to be exactly where you are from. If you are in Japan, but you want to apply in Miami, it's okay. You can apply wherever you want in the world. Okay, getting back to the family bond. So if you have a Mexican wife or Mexican husband, or even a foreigner that has a legal residence here, we can apply here in Mexico. In this case, we will need to prove the marriage license.
Millie, a note about this. The way I actually got my permanent residency, I had been a temporary resident for only 3 years, and when I got my permanent residency, it was because my youngest son at that time was born in Mexico, and because he was born in Mexico, he was a Mexican citizen, and so I and my other son were actually able to become permanent residents that way because I had had a Mexican child at that point.
Yes, that's when we talk about permanent residence.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Exactly what you are saying is like more ahead in the conversation, because right now we are just focusing in temporary residence.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Okay, now let's keep talking about the temporary residence. If you have a property in Mexico, it doesn't mean that if you have a property that it costs like less than $1 million, you can apply for this kind of visa. Here, I just write how much the value of your property needs to be that you can apply through your property. It needs to be 40,000 days of the minimum wage in Mexico, which is 3,534,400 pesos divided in your currency. In this case, the only thing that you will need to prove is like, normally you will get your property through a fideicomiso. You will need to show all these papers, the original papers, in the Mexican consulate. If the value of your house, of your property is around this, then you are fine. That it's a really easy way to do it. The problem here is true that it's a confusion about that because I own this place, now I can get my temporary residence, but that's not right. Investor is the same thing. Not because you open a company here, it means that you can have the temporary residence. You need to prove that you invest at least 20,000 days. I wrote here all the operations, as I don't want to get confused, because people get confused too about the days and how you need to do this operation that is right here. For the investors, there are like, for example, I will give you a tip. When I have clients that they want to invest in Mexico and they have enough money to before start the inversion, what I recommend is that prove your bank statements and then come as a temporary residence, showing your economic solvency. And then when you are here, we will switch it to a visa that you are investing here. It is much easier than doing this, straight this one. I hope that you understand it. Maybe I am like saying this like really easy because I understand everything, but please just, if you have any question, let me know. And the temporary visa with permission to work. In this case, you can go straight with a visa that it says permission to work, and you can work. The only thing here is that you will need to have a job offer, a company that wants to hire you. And in this case, the only problem is that if you come with this company, it doesn't mean that you need to stick with this company. It means that you need to stay all the time that you are temporary residents in a company. You cannot be a freelance if you come working in a company. Another recommendation that I do is that, for example, if you can prove your economic solvency, or you're retired but you want to work here in Mexico, you come in this kind of temporary resident, and when you are here, we can switch it to permission to work. And in this case, yes, you can be freelance. That's the only way with temporary residence. But if you come straight in a company, it will be impossible to change to a freelance until you are permanent. Before going to permanent residence, the temporary residence, it is something really important to mention that the first time when you apply, you just will receive 1 year. And after that year, you can renew for another 3 years. Until you get 4 years together, then you apply for a permanent residence. You can go there, you can go through year by year, but it is much better if you have the option to renew your temporary residence for 3 years. That's what everybody does. But the first time is always just 1 year. You cannot apply longer than 1 year. If you have any questions about temporary residence before I switch to permanent residence, you are welcome.
Millie, before you do, couple of questions that came in on chat about temporary residence. And that is the first question we have relates to when you were talking about property, if you purchase a property, right? Do you mind going back to that slide that was about, there we go. Okay, so her question is, if they own a property and let's say it's her and another person own it, okay? So they own a property that's valued at, that exceeds 3,534,400 pesos, but they own, they're not the sole owner. They own it along with other property owners. How does that work? Does it mean that the value has to be double, or does it just mean that the property needs to be that amount, their name needs to be on the deed?
That will be like, but for example, I want to be like really specific about this.
Sure.
It is like another person in his or her family, or it's another person like completely a friend, or what kind of?
I guess let's say it doesn't specify here, but let's answer it both ways. Let's say it's a husband and wife, and they own a place, and it's 4 million pesos together. Would that work?
Normally, yes. Normally, both of them can get the temporary residence.
Okay, and if it were two friends, let's say myself and my best friend, another girl, come and we decide to buy a house together, and it's 4 million pesos. Do we need to have double, or is it just that amount?
Well, depends. Like really, every consulate is completely different. Like what I will do, that maybe it will sound funny, is that I will apply in one consulate for one person and in another different consulate for the other part.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Because this is just for one person if you are not a family. But if you are family, yes, all of the family can apply, including kids.
Okay. Okay, but if you're not family, it's questionable as to how they're going to interpret that as a consulate. So your suggestion is to apply at separate consulates so that they don't.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, that's a really good question. Thank you. Did that answer your question? Yep, she says it does. Okay. We've got another couple of ones. Let me see if I can make this chat box bigger. I think I can. My chat box is so little. I'm wanting to make it larger so I can see it better. Okay. Another question is, I'm scrolling here. When you talk about, this is related to your slide of economic solvency. Yep. And she had the question, does it need to be in a checking account? Or
in a what?
In like a bank account, or can you show that in an investment account, in stocks or whatever? Does it have to be in a liquid checking account?
Well, it depends from the consulate too, but normally it should be in a bank account. But I have clients that they have showed the investment too.
Okay. All right. That's good to know. And
that's another thing, like talking about this question, is that the consulate will ask for a letter from the bank with the stamp from the bank saying that you're a client since when and all that kind of things.
Okay. Okay, good to know. There is another question that came in, and again, you guys are welcome to send them in on chat, or you're welcome to unmute yourselves and ask directly. That's not a problem. Let me read this out loud. With regards to the economic solvency, does that amount cover a husband and a wife, or just one individual? So in other words, if you want to say that do you need it per person if you're husband and wife, or do they consider that you as a unit if you are showing that you have that amount?
It is per person, but what you can do is that, for example, if one has the money, for example, if the bank account is in the husband's name, it will be just for him, but he always can ask a temporary residence, depending that saying that his wife will depend from him.
Okay.
Do you understand?
Yes, so she can file as a dependent.
Yes.
Okay.
But this amount just apply for the person that is, I know that a lot of people, they share the bank accounts, like
Okay.
especially husband and wife, but it will just apply for one, and the other one will depend economically from the other one.
Okay. And if you have a dependent, to kind of follow up, that doesn't change the amount that you're required to have, this 441,000 pesos. That amount stays the same even if you have a dependent?
Yes.
Okay. I hope that answered your question. If it doesn't, let us know, or jump in and let us know. One last.
Well, wait, I want to say something else about this.
Oh, yeah.
As coming back, like, and maybe I am repeating this too much about the every consulate is different, but in case that just one apply with the economic solvency and the other one they rejected because they want the same amount for the other person, even if she's dependent. What you can do is, like, one can have the temporary residence, come back together to Mexico, bring the marriage license with apostilla. Apostilla is a stamp that you get in the state where you got your marriage license.
Yep, absolutely.
We translate that one to Spanish with an official translator that we can do it here. We can do that here in Mexico. And then the wife or the husband can apply here in Mexico.
Oh, okay.
That's in case that the other person don't get the temporary residence in his country.
Oh, that's good to know. Okay. Let me see. Another question came in, and that is, how long is the temporary residency for economic solvency and investor? What about retirement? I think you may have answered this already, and that is any of those, you get a year your first time and then up to 3 years in your next renewal, correct? No matter what your situation is, it's the same length of time?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's as you say right now, the first time is 1 year, then you can renew for another 3 years until you get 4 years together to apply for a permanent.
Permanent, okay. Let's see. Talking about, is there a different set of terms of money amount if you are common law? I'm going to assume they're not necessarily married. They're common law marriage. I don't know that Mexico would recognize a common law marriage. They would probably treat two individuals. How does that work?
If you apply like that in the Mexican consulate and they accept it, it's okay. But in Mexico, we don't accept the common law.
Yeah.
Just the only option, the only way that they will accept it is if you have a kid together.
Okay.
But we need to prove that with a birth certificate of the kid, even if the kid don't come to Mexico.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. Are you able to, okay, so let's say, this is another question. Let's say you apply with one consulate and they deny you for whatever reason. Are you able to go to another consulate and try again?
Of course, yes. That happened to a lot of clients.
I know there's a few on the web that say that Dallas is very, very conservative in how they view everything, and is very difficult to get approvals out of. And I know a lot of people that have went elsewhere in Texas to make their
For me, easiest one that everybody tells me is Miami. Miami is really easy. They are very relaxed and everything.
Oh, interesting. That's good to know. Let me see. There's another one that says, for the temporary residency, could you repeat the information about freelance versus proving employment? So
Okay.
I'd like you to go back over, how that works. If you want to come in as freelance, you really can't, correct? You need to come in as a different,
Yes,
under a different term. You'd have to go freelance later, if I understood that right.
exactly. You understood, right? The only way that you can become freelance is that if you come like proving your economic solvency, or if you are retired, or if you have family bounds,
Mm-hmm.
and you come in that situation. But when you are here in Mexico and you have your car, then we can switch it to freelance.
Sure, that makes sense. I guess the other option would be is that what about if somebody says, well, what if I start a Mexican company for my work? Then you would be able to apply that way, correct?
Yes, you can get permission to work to become like in your own company, or just register in the tax government here and become a freelance.
Sure.
Then
Okay.
you pay your taxes every month, and that's it.
Okay, good to know. Another question. When you renew, so let's say you've had your temporary residency for a year and now you're going to renew for up to 3 years. Do you still have to prove the same amount of money in your bank, or is it basically just a rubber stamp to renew once you have it?
No, you don't need to prove the same amount. We just need to prove the 3 last bank statement, and at least if you have like 40,000 pesos per month, that is almost nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You still can get the renewal. You don't need to prove the same amount.
Okay, good to know. They also, another question, we're almost to the end of these, and that is, you mentioned Miami in the US. Do you have any recommendations for a consulate that you find people have good luck with in Canada?
Okay. It's like very different, because in Canada, I have clients that they went to Calgary and they are very happy, but at the same time, I have other clients that they don't like Calgary. So my more clients that I have are coming from Toronto and Calgary.
Good to know. Okay. And then we have someone on that's Liz, and she says, what about owning property? Liz, I'm not quite sure what you're asking there. Could you maybe chat in and elaborate on what you meant by that about owning property? We talked about, and I'm guessing it has to do with the one way of being a property owner and it's over a certain value. But if you could clarify that question for me, or jump in, unmute yourself and jump in, you'd be welcome to do that too. I'm just not sure where to go with that question. Okay, so while Liz does that, Liz, do you want to jump in? Oh, it relates to freelance, she says. So really, as a freelancer, as she's just mentioned, oh, she can't. Okay, that's all right. So if she is as a freelancer, if you own property, you can get your visa that way, from what I'm understanding from Millie. But if you want to be able to work and you own property, Millie, how would that work? So let's say you own a property and you want to freelance. Obviously, she qualifies because she owns the property, but that doesn't necessarily give her permission to work, correct?
Yes, when she applies at the Mexican consulate, she will just apply through her property. And even though it's better if you don't mention when you go to the consulate that you want to work. So you just come here, we finish the process here, you get your temporary resident without permission to work. And as soon as you have your car, we can do we can get the permission to work.
As a freelance.
As a freelance.
Okay, so Liz, I hope that answers your question. You're going to come in as a property owner without permission to work. Once you arrive, then you can start the process to get that freelance permission.
Just one more thing. I want to say that it's really important to, if you come like in all the kind of temporary residence with.
Oh.
Okay, let me go back to this. Is everything okay again?
Yes, it is. Sorry, Liz was saying she was having a hard time unmuting herself, and I don't know why, but I accidentally muted you, Millie. Sorry.
No. So what I was saying is this tip. This tip is like, please don't say in the Mexican consulate that you are coming to work on the future. You just say that you are coming to Mexico to spend your money and enjoy the beach, and that's it.
Okay, that's good to know. Last question is, do you have a minimum amount of time that you have to be in Mexico if you have your permanent residency? Does it give you any restrictions on how long you can be gone outside the country?
Okay, that's when we talk about like permanent residence, but I can answer that. If you already have your permanent residence, you can be out of the country all the time you want. The only thing, if you one day want to become Mexican, that's the only way that the last 2 years, you cannot be out of the country more than 180 days. But if it's not your case, if you don't want to become Mexican, you can be out of the country all the time that you want without any problem.
And that's with temporary or permanent?
Well, with temporary, it's different because you have a expiration date.
Right.
So you need to come back to renew the process.
But between that, as long as you get back in time to renew, there's no stipulations on how long you have to be in the country?
Exactly, especially if you don't have permission to work.
Right.
Because if you have permission to work, how can you prove that you were working if you were not here?
You weren't here, exactly. Okay, that sounds good. All right, thanks, Millie. We can continue. I think that takes care of the questions that we had.
Okay, now let's talk about permanent residence. Well, we have almost the same kind of temporary residence, but in this time the numbers change. For the economic solvency, instead of 20,000 days, we need to prove 40,000 days. That the total is 3 million something. That's the same that temporary residence. You need to prove 12 bank statements as a balance for the last 12 months with this amount. We have the retired permanent that instead of 300 days is 500 days. And the family bond is that you can go straight to permanent residence if you have a Mexican child. That's exactly what Amber was saying before. If you come here and your kid born here in Mexico, all the family goes straight to the permanent residence. Something very important is that in a lot of consulates, even if this is the law that applies, not every consulate respect these numbers. I have millions of clients that they have more than the required money for permanent residence, and they don't get it. And maybe the reason that they don't get it is because they are young. When I say young, I am talking about like 60 or less. I don't know why a lot of Mexican consulates, they don't give the permanent residence, even if you apply. Now let's talk about the difference between temporary and permanent. That is a question that a lot of people ask me all the time. Well, the temporary, as we were talking, you need to renew year by year, or the first time 1 year and then 3 years. And it's one step before you get the permanent. The permanent, you never need to renew it. As soon as you get it, unless the law change, that I don't think so, at least for a few years, you are safe and you don't need to renew anything. As you mentioned before, in the temporary residence, you need to come back for the renewal. For the permanent, you can be out all the time. As I said before, for the temporary, if you want to work in a company, you cannot switch to freelance. But if you have permanent, you can do freelance as you come here. Like, for example, if you have Amber, that you are a permanent resident right now. If you were working in a company and you want to be freelance, you can do it. Or even you can do, like being permanent, you can work in that second. In the second that you arrive to Mexico, you can start working. And we have 90 days to let know immigration that you are working. Another difference is that a lot of people keep the temporary residence because they have foreigner cards. And with a permanent card, you cannot do that. Permanent, I say here that is the first step to become Mexican, because if you want to become Mexican one day, you will need to have the permanent residence. And another difference is that you can open bank accounts with any of these residents, but with permanent, you can get a credit card, while with the temporary, you can't. Well, before we keep going, if you have questions about permanent residence.
Good question. Let me jump in and see if there's any, again, anybody's welcome to unmute. Let me see if they have any questions related to, one thing I want to note as a real estate agent that might not necessarily be on here is that if you are a homeowner, it behooves you to work toward permanent residency. If you don't have it from the get-go, after your 4 years of temporary, become a permanent. And why I say that is because, at least as the law stands now, there are some tax advantages when you go to sell that property if you're a permanent resident that aren't offered to you if you're temporary residents. And I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on that in this particular webinar, because we've talked about it in the Selling Your Property webinar, but it's definitely something that is important for homeowners and really becomes a difference in their bottom line when they go to sell if they have permanent residency versus temporary or just keeping your tourist. Let me look and see. Quick question. These are the questions that have come in, Millie.
Okay.
Asks, she's looking at when you mention temporary can have a foreign car, right? And as a permanent resident, you can no longer have your foreign car in Mexico. But she's asking, with a temporary, or what is required to buy a car in Mexico? So maybe not import your foreign car, drive it down from the US or Canada, but let's say you want to go buy a car at the Ford dealer in Cancun. Do you need to be a temporary or a permanent resident to do that?
Yes, you will need to have because they will ask for a number that here in Mexico is called CURP, C-U-R-P, and the only way to get it is if you are residents here in Mexico. So with either temporary or permanent, you can get a car on your name if you buy it here.
That's correct. Yeah, I know that for a fact. I actually had a client that bought a car from someone privately and then went to register it and couldn't register it. So it is important that you have either a temporary or permanent resident if you want a car.
Another thing that people do is that, for example, if someone else is selling his car and you buy it, well, you don't switch the names on the car. It will just show that it's still in the last owner's name.
Right, right.
But it's not recommendable.
Not what you want to do. Kent Mann asks about what's defined as a foreign car. And Kent, what she's talking about there is, it's not who manufactures the car. What she's talking about there is if you have, it's the plates on the car. So if you drive your car that was plated in the United States or Canada down to Mexico, that's considered a foreign vehicle in Mexico. It really doesn't have to do with where that car was manufactured. It's what plates are on it. So if you want to take your car and drive it down to Puerto Morelos or wherever you're going, you can do that as a tourist or with your temporary visa. You are no longer able to have that car in Mexico if you are a permanent resident. And then, okay, a couple more questions, Millie. It says, Tori asks, can we only have our temporary residence for a max of 4 years?
Yes,
or
that's the maximum.
At the end of 4 years, do you have to go permanent or can you go back to temporary again?
If you are doing everything all right and you have the 4 years together, you apply, you go straight to permanent. But if you don't want to become permanent, the only thing to do if you want to go back to temporary is let expire your temporary resident and start over.
Okay. And then his question is when you want to renew, this is a good question, whether it's for permanent or also for temporary, how long should you start the process before your expiration date?
Well, first, permanent, we don't need to renew.
Correct.
But for the temporary residence, we need 30 days before your document expires.
And 30 days, and that's if you're renewing temporary, or if you're temporary going permanent, it's 30 days?
Yes.
Okay.
And it cannot be before than 30 days, but it can be since 30 days before until the day that expires. So
okay.
we have like 30 days to start the process.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, so Susan asked, as a tourist, you bring in your car and it has what they call a tip, a TIP. Is that the same for a temporary resident? And yes, it is. You come in with that same tip on your car. Now, Millie, I know you're not necessarily dealing with the customs and cars, so I don't want to tag you on this question necessarily. She says, am I only allowed to keep that temporary permit on the car for 6 months? You probably don't necessarily know that, correct?
Nothing about.
Yeah, I think for the one that asked that question, we can talk about this later. There's the people that I know that have done it say that as long as you keep your temporary residency current, your permit that you use to bring that car in stays current. Now, I don't want you to take that as gospel. I'm not a customs agent either, but that is the word that I've gotten from clients that have done it. Another question. Can you keep your temporary residency for more than 4 years, or is that the maximum? Okay, so we've talked about that. You can either go permanent or let it expire and redo your 4 years again. What if you don't have the full amount of money needed for permanent economic solvency by then? So let's say you've done your 4 years as a temporary and it's time for you to go permanent, but you don't have the money that they require for you to go permanent. Do they request that same amount?
No, it's the same that when you are renewing your temporary residence, you don't need to prove again the same amount of money that you proved before to get the temporary residence. When you have 4 years together, automatically you go to permanent residence, even if you have just like 10,000 pesos in your bank account.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I think that's all the questions we've got to move on from here.
Okay, so let's keep going. Now, a lot of people that right now in immigration, I do normally the immigration papers in Playa del Carmen. Puerto Morelos, it was part of Cancun before, but now that it's independent, we can do the papers in Cancun or Playa del Carmen. In Playa del Carmen and in Cancun is the same right now. The process are taking, like for example, if you go to the Mexican consulate, get your consular visa and your passport, and you come back to Mexico, and we do the next step. The next step is to switch the consular visa that you have in your passport for the original card. Okay, when that happens, you cannot leave the country, because when you enter Mexico, they give you like the normal tourist visa that you have when you receive 180 days. But in this time, when you show your consular visa, they will give you 30 days instead of 180 days. That means that we have 30 days to switch that consular visa for the original card. And this process normally takes like 2 weeks, but right now in immigration it's taking like 3 months. So exit letters, that's in case that you need to leave the country while the document is in process. I know three months is like very crazy, but it is the way that it is right now, because they say that they don't have enough personnel, or maybe they are lazy or whatever, but we have this delay with all the documents right now. So you always can leave the country with an exit letter, and you just need to let know the person who is doing your immigration papers with 1 week in advance, because we need to prepare a whole process to get this letter. This letter, it can be used to be out of the country just for 60 days. If you pass the 60 days out of the country, automatically your document here, they cancel it. The same if you come to Mexico and you have your process, but you need to leave in an urgent and you don't want to wait for your exit letter, then if you leave the country without any paper, they cancel. They make you sign a paper at the airport that you quit to your process that is in immigration. So it's very important that when something in immigration is in process, you don't leave the country. You can work, you can travel inside Mexico without any problem, but you cannot leave the country without letting know immigration. And other kind of procedures is like regularization is that, for example, if you didn't check the expiration date in your temporary residence and expire, to prove, like, we can do a regularization, we have 60 days to prove that your document is expired, like within 60 days. But in this case, we will need to show the money of 40,000 days of the minimum wage. So I don't recommend you to get to let expire your document. You just need, like, maybe set up an alarm in your phone or something that 30 days before renew your document, because regularization is the only process in immigration that you cannot leave the country because you will be illegal as your document would be expired. So you cannot, even you cannot get an exit letter in this kind of process. Permission to work, that's another process that we can do, as we say before, that if you have a temporary residence without permission to work, we can switch it to permission to work. Notifications, either temporary or permanent, you need to let know immigration. If you change your work, if you change your address, if you change your marital status, or if you change your nationality, we have 90 days to let know immigration. In case that you pass the 90 days, you need to pay a fine that immigration will say how much you will need to pay. But even if you are permanent, being permanent doesn't mean that you need to do anything else in immigration. Whatever that these kind of things happen, we need to let know immigration. And the last one is reposition of document. That means that if you lost your immigration document, we can get a reposition, but this process, it takes the same as all the other process, around 3 months right now. And it's like a really long process. So what I recommend is that when you are here and you have your immigration document, make a copy and just bring it with you all the time. And here I just wrote how much you need to pay in taxes, depending on what kind of document you're getting. If you get temporary residence for 1 year, this amount is in Mexican pesos. That's just the tax that we need to pay to immigration. Every year, the prices are going up a little bit. For example, if you're permanent, you need to pay 4,828, a little bit more than a temporary residence. If you want to leave the country, 405 pesos to get the exit letter. Or for example, if here I didn't write how, here the reposition, if you lost your document is 1,220. You don't need to pay again all these amounts. And I think that that's it, but I am here to answer all the questions now.
Thank you, Millie. I've had a couple come in on chat, and the other thing that I'm going to do is I've had some people tell me, and I'm not sure if everybody's had this experience, but they've had a hard time unmuting, so I can also unmute everybody as well. But let me ask these first two questions that are here. One is, she asks, are you able to hold a U.S. citizenship and a permanent resident, a Mexican permanent resident status? And to answer your question, Angie, she says, are you able to be a dual citizen? So one thing I want to make clear, and Millie can touch on this too, is that your permanent residency is not Mexican citizenship. That's actually a step beyond permanent residency. The permanent resident card, Angie, would be like our green card that we would issue to immigrants in our country. So you're technically not a dual citizen. Now, as far as whether or not you can hold dual citizenship if you want to become a Mexican citizen, that's something that you should look at the U.S. Embassy site for. They're pretty particular about the conditions under which they recommend people have dual citizenship. And that would definitely be a question for, you know, a U.S. Attorney as well. Mexico doesn't care, but the U.S. is pretty particular. Canada seems to be more open, but the U.S. is pretty particular about U.S. citizens and how many citizenships they hold that they willingly go seek. But that is actually not what we're discussing today, because the Mexican permanent resident visa doesn't make you a Mexican citizen. It just gives you permanent residency status. So I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, I'm going to unmute everybody here and let you chime in. Susan asks, Millie, let's say you own a house in full in Canada, right? You own nothing on your permanent residence in Canada and you're wanting to apply for temporary residency. Have you ever had clients that, like a bank account, or sometimes you said the consulate will consider an investment account, do they ever take that asset into consideration when they look at your economic solvency?
That you own a property in your country?
In Canada, right.
No.
Yeah, I think
they don't accept.
Yeah, I didn't think so. Usually it's a cash flow issue, correct? They want to make sure you're getting enough cash to support yourself while you're here, correct?
Yes, but even in some consulates, they accept, for example, if you have a company and you prove the 12 bank statements from your company, and you can prove that you are the owner from the company, that's the way that you can apply to.
Gotcha. Okay. I just unmuted everyone. So your mics are open. If you have mics available, you're welcome to chat in. But I know some people, the way they're logging in, they're not on mics. Someone asked, and I'm not sure whether, Millie, you would know this, for the country's healthcare, like the Seguro Popular, does that also require a temporary or permanent residency? You can't use that as a tourist, obviously.
Yeah, you will need a residence here in Mexico.
Correct. Now there's always private insurance that you can get, and private hospitals that you have access to without temporary or permanent. But if you want to use the Seguro Popular national insurance, you will need to have your visa either temporary or permanent.
Yes.
Any other questions? I think that might be it. Feel free to chime in if you do. If not, I would love, Millie, please let me take this opportunity to thank you for coming on tonight and sharing all this information with us. I certainly appreciate your time. We've got one other question coming in, and it says, I just want to we've got a few last questions coming in now. Okay, so someone asked, I just want to be sure I understand. If you own a company in the USA and you can show you own it, are you able to use the income from it? And
yes.
If you wouldn't be a retiree at that point, but you would be showing economic solvency, correct?
Yes, but remember that depends from every consulate. As I say, like, consulates are like crazy sometimes because they accept what they want and what they don't want, and it depends really on their mood. And another tip is, like, always be like really nice to them, because if you are like, if you go like, yeah, I have this and I have this, sometimes they get like so emotional and they don't give you the residence.
Sure. That's a good tip too. Be nice to the consulate people, no matter how long you've waited in line. Another question they have is, permanent does not let you out of having a fideicomiso to own land, correct? That is the case. I can answer that. Whether you're a permanent resident or a temporary resident, unless you are a Mexican citizen, you do need a fideicomiso if you own within the restricted zone. Though in some other, I would refer you to the Buying in Mexico webinar. It's strongly encouraged that you do anyway, just for inheritance reasons. It makes that a lot simpler. But yes, because it's not citizenship, you do need to have a fideicomiso to own property, whether you're a temporary or a permanent resident. Melissa asks, if I have minor children, should I apply for temporary residency for all of them, or is it just enough for the parents?
Well, you can do, it would be easier if they accepted in the Mexican consulate for all the family. So you just come with all of the family come with the consular visa. In case that the consulate say, no, we are just giving the residence to the parents or just even to one of them. In that case, we can apply here in Mexico, but you will need to bring, if it's your case, the birth certificate with apostilla, and we translate it here. Or if for the wife, we will need the marriage license.
That makes
the original, and everything needs to be with apostilla. In case that you don't have that, it's not valid here in Mexico.
Correct. Now, just to kind of further clarify that, it would be absolutely a requirement for the kids to have their temporary residency if they were going to stay longer than 180 days, which is what they're allowed to stay on their tourist visa, correct? Because minors are held to that same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, so if you're planning to stay more than 180 days with minors, you would absolutely want to have their temporary resident visas so that they don't lose their, become an illegal status while they're in Mexico. And what Millie's mentioning, an apostille. So an apostille is a seal that goes on documents so that, like, let's say I show up with a marriage certificate from Detroit, Michigan in Mexico. Mexico doesn't know that that's a valid marriage certificate. They're like, how do you know you didn't print this out on, whatever, the internet? So there are some countries that are in a treaty that mutually accepted that if you get an apostille in your state on those legal documents, that they would automatically recognize them in their country. And Mexico and the U.S. have that relationship. Canada and the U.S. do not. So you actually have to there's a different process for Canadians to have their legal documents because Canada is not a part of that section of the Hague Treaty. So unfortunately, Canadians, no matter where you go, you don't get your legal documents recognized.
Right. Sorry to interrupt you, Amber, but in this case, Canadians and countries that they don't have apostilla in their country, what they need to do is that they need to go to the Mexican consulate and get an stamp on the original documents, just proving that are original. So to be valid, for example, one birth certificate from Canada, it will need to show an stamp from the Mexican consulate in Canada.
Perfect. Thank you. Because that was my question is could you talk about that? Because absolutely. Because I know from doing some real estate stuff, they can't, but that's good to know. They get it in their consulate. Okay. Let me go back and make sure. Are the slides going to be posted somewhere? We video recorded this whole session, and so in about 2 days, it takes a while for it to process and then email to me. But once I have it, I'm going to load it into YouTube on our YouTube channel, and then I'm going to be sending everyone the link. So you will have access to this after.
In case that someone has a specific question up there or remembers something or has another doubt, please send me an email and I will be happy to answer it.
Perfect. Thanks for offering, Millie. One last question that we've got in, and that is, if I apply for temporary residency and get a 1-year renewal, what determines when I go to renew the next time whether I'll receive 1, 2, or 3 years?
Normally they give always what we ask for.
Okay.
So there is like no restriction of like, not because you are showing less money, they are going to give you 1 year. Normally, if we do everything correct, they will give you what we ask for.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, well, I think that's all of the questions. Thank you so much, Millie. I appreciate it. And we will also put your contact information in the comments of the video when we post it so that people can get in touch with you. And thanks, everyone, for attending. If you have any questions, please follow up with Millie afterward. Again, she's at legallyinmexico.com. You can go to her website. And if you want to stay up on some of these webinars, go to portomorelosblog.com. There you can subscribe. We always post the new webinars when we're going to be hosting them. And so that way you're welcome to register for any of the other topics that come up as well. So thanks so much. We've loved having you, Millie, and I've actually learned a lot. Thank you, because like I said, it had been a while since I'd been through the process, and so it's good to be able to get an update on things.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for listening everything.
Absolutely. Everybody's saying thank you in the chat box. Appreciate it, Millie. Have a great night.
You too.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I'm trying to